This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lainey Liberty, and this is episode number 6. The theme of tonight's episode is world schooling, and it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. World schooling is the act of learning from the world, inspired by everything around you and having the intention to explore, learn, research, participate, and ultimately go deeper. Many families who identify with the world schooling label supplement their children's learning with curriculum or formal classrooms. There are others that are dedicated and adopted an entire lifestyle committed to learning from the world, like Miro and I, who are also radical unschoolers. So we'll touch on all of these issues tonight with our panel. There is no right or wrong way to world school, and the act of world schooling is all-inclusive. Many world schooling families participate in some aspect of travel as a family to share their experience, although the length and mode of travel vary from family to family. Tonight we have a panelist. We have 3 people on the panel, and just before we went live, we lost Daryl. I think his internet connection is a little iffy at this point, but we're keeping our fingers crossed that he's going to join us. So let me introduce him as if he's here. This being a world schooling show, we've got representatives from all across the globe tonight, and it's really a spectacular panel. So Daryl, he is one of the 3 families that are here, and every person on this panel world schools differently. So it's going to be an incredible conversation. Daryl and his family live a lifestyle surrounding everything cycling. He's a native from Canada, and he realized that he needed to relocate his family in order to cycle year-round. So he uprooted his family and moved them to Austin, Texas. And then again, after that, to Grenada, West Indies, where he and his family are the proud owners of the Caribbean's first and only bicycle cafe called Mocha Spike. So I'm welcoming Daryl. He's not here, but just so he knows, we gave him this wonderful introduction. The next person on our panel is Sabrina, and Sabrina is the creator of the popular blog Family and Footprints, a website highlighting the world as a child's classroom focused on family travel, outdoor adventure, and world schooling. After the birth of her daughter in 2011, Sabrina and her husband challenged the way that they were living, wanting to simplify their lives and live with more freedom. Sabrina left her job to be with their daughter while she and her husband sought a more flexible income, moonlighting on entrepreneurial ventures. Over time, Sabrina was introduced and inspired by the unschooling and world schooling approaches. They saw the world as their daughter's classroom and her as a sponge, taking in one enriching experience after another. So welcome, Sabrina. I'm so excited to hear your stories.
Thanks, Lainey. It's great to be here.
And finally, let's meet Jason. Jason spent 13 years in Tokyo writing about music, cameras, contemporary art, and parenting, using his spare time to search the city for new places to learn and play with his children. In September of 2013, Jason and his wife quit their desk jobs, pulled their kids out of school, and left Japan and began an experiment in homeschooling, remote working, and long-term family travel. He writes about their triumphs, disasters, and other discoveries at anepiceducation.com. Welcome, Jason. I'm so happy to have you here. The name of your website was the first time I saw your website, I said, I have to meet this family. It's such a great name. And you guys are so on track and so um, uh, open with your journey. And I'm really, really happy that everybody on this panel is here to talk about their journey. So why don't we start with you, Jason? And if you can go ahead and share with us a little bit more about your background and what ultimately led you and your family down the path into world schooling.
Okay, well, thank you, Lainey. I'm really happy to be here. I'm fairly new to the panel discussion, so I hope you'll forgive me if I ramble on or am a little too brief. Yeah, a little background about me. I'm from the United States. I grew up near the Atlanta area. But in 1997, I moved abroad, and I've lived abroad since then, since 1997. Um, as you mentioned in the intro, I spent 13 years in Japan, primarily in Tokyo, and I have two children: a son who is 12, and a daughter who is 8. And both of them were born and raised in Tokyo, and we lived there for a long time. It's a fantastic city. I loved it. But at one point, we realized that we kind of wanted to see a little more of the world. I can go into those details as to why at length if time allows. But the tell is that my wife and I worked all the time. We were rarely, all four of us, at home or together at the same time, unless we were all asleep. And there were times where my wife and I kind of felt like tag team single parents. We were never, one of us was taking care of the two kids while the other was at the office until 11 o'clock. So we wanted a change. And there were a variety of reasons as well. Education-wise, our kids went to public schools in Japan, and which are great in many ways. But we forecast that with junior high school and high school on the horizon, we felt like there wasn't enough critical thinking in these school systems, and that there was a real emphasis on rote learning. And I'm sure that's a big topic with world schoolers and unschoolers. We're not anti-public schools at all. We think that there are benefits to them, and that each person is different. But back to our story. We decided that we wanted to leave. So my wife left her job. I convinced my company to allow me to work remotely. And we left in September of 2013, about a year and a half ago, and have been slow traveling through Southeast Asia for the last year and a half. We've been using Malaysia, the island of Penang in northwestern Malaysia. We've been using that as a home base for the last year. And that's where I talk to you today. And one more thing, if I could add, I come here as to learn more than to teach or to share. We've been homeschooling for a year and a half, and but our system is evolving, and we have perhaps unique, perhaps common issues and challenges to the way we teach and the way we interact with education, and I can discuss those here today. But I'm here hopefully to learn from you and from the other panelists.
Thank you, Jason. And actually, I'm so looking forward to diving into your story a little deeper. We'll swing back around to you. I know that there has been some struggles on the horizon because of not only work, but also your relationship to the whole education, the education as a whole. And so we'll get into that a little bit more. I want to move over to Sabrina. And Sabrina, if you could go ahead and share with us, I gave a brief intro, but I know there's so much more. And your blog is actually one of my favorite reading blogs. I love to read your writing. It's such a fabulous blog. And you're so passionate about the outdoors and learning from nature. So go ahead and share with us a little bit about your background, what brought you to this place, and how world schooling fits into your life as somebody living in the States.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. I'm really excited to be here. And, a lot like Jason was just saying, in terms of we're on this sort of journey that's ever evolving as we find our learning and lifestyle that really matches our family. And so I'm, I'll talk a little bit about where we came to where we are now, and then the future is, anyone's guess as we continue to search within ourselves and search the world for where we go next. But also, like Jason, I grew up in the States, and I'm currently based in the U.S. and have always been an avid traveler, and that sort of fit in with my work. So it was, I was working, but then I would, sort of carve out time for traveling, and I guess I would say that world schooling, we were sort of found ourselves practicing world schooling before we even knew there was a name for it, and it sort of just became an extension of our parenting and of the way that we were living. After my daughter was born, we sort of we turned a lot of things on its head. We sort of questioned how much time we were spending apart from each other, and we wanted more time together. We wanted more flexibility. We wanted to be able to say, these are the things that are going to make us happier, so let's do them and not wait until a later date to do them. Let's do them now. So we started making some changes. I stayed home with my daughter, and she's still relatively young. She's 4 years old, but even in that short period of time, I realized my husband and I realized the kind of learning environment that we wanted to create for her. And a lot of that was based off of how we watched her natural learning. And we watched her sort of interact with the world as a very young child, taking everything in around her, and, with very little limitation, but a very engaged environment. She was able to be so creative and her own little explorer. And it was really exciting and kind of contagious, where we realized we wanted to be learning from the world just as much as she was. And so we sort of realized, okay, I'm not sure how that's going to fit in with a traditional schooling model. And we analyzed that a lot and thought about all the alternatives. And that's when we started realizing, without knowing it, that we were unschooling our daughter and that we were world schooling our daughter. Because even though we're based in the US, with me being home and with my husband's schedule, we are able to travel for extended periods of time. And so we are slow traveling part of the year and based in the US the other part of the year. So without realizing it, we were unschooling and world schooling our daughter. And we didn't see a reason when she's 4 now, but she's, starting to reach the age where the questions come up, what are you doing for your daughter's schooling? And so we didn't see a reason why we would stop and stop what we were doing, because it was working so well. And so as we started exploring more of these alternative education models, when we realized what type of schooling we were doing, we realized we're in good company. And so we're very happily unschooling and world schooling our daughter in that way.
And can you tell me, when was the first time you actually heard the term world schooling, and how did that have meaning to you?
Well, I believe it must have been when she was in the past year or so. So in the past couple of years. And to me, it felt like what I wanted unschooling name to be, because for me, the idea of your education can happen in so many different ways, including, a classroom if that's how you want to deepen your interest, but really the world and everything that it's offering from your backyard to halfway across the world is, that's every part of it is the world. And so when I came across that word, to me, it felt like it really encapsulated everything that we were doing in a very positive and accurate way.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of the experience that I had as well. And I think, like you, the difference or the similarities between you and I are that we both come at it from our child's education from an unschooling perspective. And I said in the intro that we identify with being radical unschoolers. And that's, for people that are really into terminology and labels, because there are people that really are, they have to know exactly what it is that you're classified and qualified as. So that's what we are. We are radical unschoolers who are traveling. And when I heard the term world schooling for the first time, we were already doing it because we were unschooling and traveling. But it didn't really click to me as a formalized type of education. As I started to go deeper into the alternative education world and speak to homeschoolers and speak to travelers and speak to unschoolers, we had a lot in common. But the element of traveling was what the unique difference was. The learning from the world. And then I started to think that the more intentional we became about that being an active part of my son's education, the stronger the impulses and the inspiration was to teach us and to learn and to absorb all this new information. So I really got behind the term world schooling and really have tried to get others to use this term in such a way that it becomes an all-inclusive thing. So as Jason, and I wish Daryl was here, but as Jason will talk about, you're a homeschooler who travels and your children came from a formal education setting. Sabrina, your daughter did not go into school, so you came at the world schooling from a slightly different area too. But I've also spoken with world schoolers who live in the States and their kids go to normal school, but they invite couch surfers to stay with them, and they go, explore the world in their own backyard by going to foreign restaurants and doing whatever they can to allow the world itself to become part of that inspiration to teach. And so that's one of the definitions that I like to talk about right up front, that world schooling is all inclusive, and you can be an expat, you could be a traveler, you could be living in a very traditional life and still be a world schooler. I actually want to shift gears a little bit and jump back over to Jason and talk a little bit about the curriculum that you use with your children. And I want to know how the formal curriculum is not implemented, but inspired by the travels that you guys are doing as well, and if that has any role on the type of curriculum that you're studying and influences it in any way.
Okay, that's a good question. I think I don't think that a lot of the sort of core curriculum we do is necessarily influenced by our travels. I almost think that the travels are a curriculum unto themselves, and the actual sort of sitting down and working on a specific subject type of curricula are just your core basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, science. We use a variety of websites and apps that I'm happy to detail if needed. Ones like Khan Academy that most people know and heartily endorse. We also use a lot of reading apps because our children aren't native English speakers. They grew up in Japan. Japanese is their first language, and so one of the core goals when we left a year and a half ago was to have our kids at their age level. I mean, and can talk about the validity of age levels in reading, but we wanted our 11-year-old reading books that other 11-year-olds read. We wanted our 8-year-old reading books that other 8-year-olds read. We've surpassed that. We have 2 kids who can read and write and speak English just as well. We do a bit of study before we head to a new country. Just to back up, we've been, like I said, we've been in Southeast Asia for the last year and a half. The first 6 months, we spent 2 months each in Taiwan, and then in Penang, and then in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is in northern Thailand. Then we went back to Japan. I had to kind of renegotiate my contract, visit family, and then we came back out to Penang because there were a lot of opportunities here for the kids. And so we've been based here, and while we've been here, we've spent time in Vietnam, in several places in Indonesia, such as Sumatra and Bali, and then and all over peninsular Malaysia and southern Thailand. So we talk a little about those things when we go to those places, and we look at the history, we look at the cultures that are around. But as far as like determining the curriculum based on the countries I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like to hear how you guys do that. We do a lot of the core basics that we think are important. We also try to keep up with their Japanese. We don't want them to lose their Japanese. That's their first language, and they're fluent and on level as far as writing kanji and hiragana and katakana and all the sort of phonetic systems of Japanese. So we want to keep those going. But at the same time, I guess, and this may be the realm of radical unschoolers, in that I wouldn't say we choose curriculum based on the countries, but we allow them, or sort of encourage them to navigate the world for us. We hand them the Google Maps. We ask them for directions. We want them to buy the tickets when we're about to get on a subway and look at the map and see where we're supposed to go. I won't say that we do that every specific time, but we try to do a great deal of that. And we've noticed considerable levels of confidence and resourcefulness that they've gained in the last year, as far as everything from trying to get us a bargain when we get to a new guest house to see if we can get a deal. My son's become a little bit of a wheeler dealer in that capacity, and he was a very shy child and remains a shy child in many ways, but is able to kind of step up. If I'm maybe going off topic, but the short answer is the countries we go don't really dictate our curriculum, but while we're in those countries, we visit museums, we take cooking classes, we visit historical monuments, and we talk about those. And then we also look up, before we go, I usually send links to news articles or historical videos from YouTube about that region. I send those to their email accounts and then ask them to review those, and then we talk about those before we leave.
Yeah, wonderful. You're using all of the resources that are available to you to actually create an educational and intentional educational experience. I want to ask Sabrina, since your daughter's young, obviously, even if you were homeschooling, you wouldn't at 4 years old be using a curriculum. But do you, as a family, do some of the things that are similar to what Jason does in terms of researching the place and the country and doing age appropriate things with your daughter as you travel?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and some of that research is actually what formulates our travel plans. So, not that we're necessarily doing the research within the intention of ending up at that location, but as we're reading stories with our daughter, and in our learning approach with her, it's very self-directed. So as she expresses in her own ways to us the things that she's interested in, and we dive in deeper into various mediums with that, she will learn about different countries or different experiences in history that relate back to different regions. And we dive in deeper to that. And so she has quite an extensive list of places that she wants to travel to, that it's just a matter of us saying, okay, well, how can we get there while this is still an interest of yours? So a lot of times that's, on one hand, really connected with what she's already interested in. And then on the other hand, there are opportunities that present themselves for us to travel to various locations. And so if that's not already on her radar, then yes, we're using a lot of the, books and different resources online, even talking with people that we know who maybe have been to those places or have or were born in those places, or taking part, since we live in an area where there are a lot of different cultural opportunities we might experience, get mild exposure to what it's like in another country through exhibits at museums or cultural events or things like that. And so we really do try and round out the perspective of what it might be like in another country. And for instance, before we went to Germany with her a couple years back for an extended period of time. And so we were at that point even just talking about the idea that there are people who speak different languages, and even just trying to lay the groundwork for that. And of course, that was a really abstract concept for a 2-year-old at the time to be able to understand. She's just learning her own language. But by the end of our stay, where she is learning not only that she's able to communicate without language because she's not able to say the same words as someone else, a child she's playing with on the playground, but coming home, just even understanding that people in the world speak different languages. That's something that you can talk about and prep for. But of course, when you're immersed in that, or when you're experiencing that, that's just another layer on top of the discussion or the preparation for what a trip will entail.
Being that we're all parents here, we all have ideas about what education is, right? I mean, we want to, obviously, we're parents. We want what's best for our kids. We want them to be educated. But before we move on, I actually want to ask each of the panelists, what does education actually mean to you and your family? And Sabrina, why don't we go back to you? It's kind of an abstract question, but it really, I think there's merit in addressing this, because that will then determine how we apply the educational process to our children, with our children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question, because it's not just a black or white answer, or a right or wrong answer, because it is so highly even individualized, because we are all different types of learners, and we are all different people who tick different ways. And that was exactly the reason why we wanted to be able to provide our daughter the experiences where she could thrive, based off of her interests and based off of the way that she learns and interacts with the world. And so I think for us, education really stems from being able to even go a step further, probably in, because we see life as learning, right? They're sort of, I cannot really see a way to take them apart. They're so deeply intertwined. So when you're living, you're learning. There is no on off for us. It's just constant. So it really goes back to, I think the core of it is, are we, I want our daughter to be able to find her personal happiness. And so if she's, moving in a direction where she is seeking out the things that she's interested in, and learning about herself and the way that the world works, and just really guiding herself through her interests, then we're helping to lead her to her ultimate happiness. And so that's really a driving force behind our education. It's this whole perspective of life, and ultimately that will incorporate at some point down the line how she makes a living and how she shares her passions with the world, and gives of herself to the world as much as she takes from it. And so I think that is certainly woven into that, but it's a really holistic part. It's it's her passions are just as much part of her happiness, which as we think about education in some respects as a way to lead to employment, or being able to navigate the world. I think our goal is, how can we get her to a place where she is just able to say within herself, this is making me happy, and this is something I'm interested in, so this is how I know how to pursue it more, and looking at all of the potential modes of deepening your interest. And so sometimes that might be immersion in another culture, immersion in a course of interest to you, taking time to just process things within yourself. There's so many ways to actually achieve that. But I think it's really comes back to that holistic approach of life equals learning in our book.
Yeah, what a great answer. And I'm actually really looking forward to hearing yours too, Jason. So you're up.
Okay. But before I answer that, I would just like to maybe add on, or at least speak to Sabrina and say how envious I am that she's starting this sort of world schooling journey as early as she is. We've had, like any family, we've had our ups and downs over the last year, trying to figure out what works best for us and what makes everybody happy. But the only regret that I have in the last year and a half is that we didn't start earlier. I think there is. I think you can start at any time, and I'm not saying that there's a cutoff date, but I think, at least in the context of our family, I wish we had left earlier. I wish we had started this. This sort of journey of ours at an earlier date, because we would be that much closer to sort of a system that we've refined and quite enjoy. Okay, back to your question, I think, which was, what is education? I could blab half a day on what I think it is or what I think it isn't, but just a few days ago, I actually heard it put better than I had ever put it before. I'm putting together a podcast series that I've told you about, Lainey. I'd like to have you as a guest at some point. Basically, where I interview long-term traveling families, and I was interviewing a guy named Clark Vandeventer, who would be someone that would be a good guest on the show. He's based in Lake Tahoe area and travels part of the year. And I was asking him about his techniques. He has 3 kids, and he is an unschooler, world schooler. I'm not sure what title, or if he would like a title. But I was asking him his beliefs and philosophy on this, and he put it in one sentence. He said, "I want to raise resourceful kids." And that really struck, a chord with me, because a lot of times education is associated with just the consumption and regurgitation of information, and that's trivia. That's Trivial Pursuit. That's that doesn't benefit you, deep down or long term. I fully accept that there are certain hoops that you have to jump through in life, whether it be a certain test or a certain certification in this club or get. I'm totally fine. I want my kids prepared for that. But deeper down than that is I want my kids to learn to be resourceful. And by resourceful, that means being able to see what they want and figure out the means to get it. And I mean, that's what every parent wants, right?
Yeah, very much so. Parents of children that go to formal schools, like you and by the way, I also have that deep desire that I wish I was started this before my son was 10. I mean, we started this journey when he was 10 years old. So I'm with you along those lines. I wish we started earlier. But I think those of us that take our kids out of a formal system, and those of us that went through a formal education system ourselves, have the experience and have the knowledge that education and learning are somewhat of an institutionalized process, and the learning part of it is taken out of the equation more often, and the testing and the memorization and all of those things that we rebel against, or those of us that didn't rebel, I was one. Those are the things that we rebel against. And if we can come back around and find learning again, and learning as something that's enjoyable or that we love doing. And I love that Sabrina said, she wanted to learn with her daughter, and that was the same experience that travel gave to me. So those of us that started off in the formal education system generally go through something called deschooling. And what that means is we have to shift the paradigm of what we believe education really is. And once we find the meaning for ourselves, because it's going to be different for every family and every person, then we can move forward accordingly. And I think Jason, you guys are right on target. So are you, Sabrina, too. And I think however you articulate the learning that works for you and your family, that's great. And the resourcefulness is really a huge part of it. So bravo to both of you. Gosh, I wish Daryl was here too as part of our panel. I'd really love to hear his story.
Yeah, maybe you've seen it. Seems like the internet went out in his house, which is a fact of life when you live in certain parts of the world. So hopefully that'll come back, and because I'd like to hear his story too. I think he has older kids, and I think there are different phases of world schooling that you face with young children and older children. So.
Yeah, and that was part of putting together this panel. I wanted a different range and different styles. Daryl lives with his family as expats, and they're still world schoolers. So they're not travelers per se, but they're world schoolers. So it's a whole different definition to it. So yes, bravo. I actually would like to talk about, or actually ask both of the panelists that are here to talk a little bit about some of the specific world schooling experiences that you've had that you can give examples of your children just lighting up as they're having these experiences. And Jason, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, for one thing, I think this is on topic. I tend to like to hand my children sharp objects. We've taken when we travel, we take a number of cooking classes where the kids have their own setup. They're basically sitting. They're in the class with all other adults. We've never been in one with other children, and so our kids, use the knives and they chop and they cook their own food. Of course, my wife and I are there to kind of observe and make sure no one is injured with blades or boiling oil or anything like that. But we found that that taking cooking classes, at least in Southeast Asia, is a great introduction to the environment, the produce, and the sort of agriculture of an area, and obviously also there are cultural elements, and not to mention just the confidence level when an 8-year-old produces an amazing pad thai or Vietnamese spring rolls that she created herself. We find that that through cooking or cooking specifically is a great world schooling sort of experience. We also are very arts minded, creative minded. So when we were in Bali, we took a silversmithing class and a wood carving class, and traditional painting classes. These sort of things allow you to interact with locals, and you get to learn a little bit of that. But I also, back to what I was saying before, just having them sort of navigate life. How are we going to get from this point to this point? Okay, now you figure this out. Now, when we get there, this is how much the hotel room costs. How much is that in yen? Which is, yen is our base currency, so we have to do a little math there. And then, I tell my son, okay, you go to the front desk and you see if they have rooms available. You ask how much they are, and if you feel like wheeling and dealing, you go for it. So that's actually several, but those are a few things that that immediately pop to mind that I would consider world schooling type experiences.
And the interesting thing is, before we had kids, we would never say that, my life is an education. But when we have kids, we suddenly feel compelled to break it into subjects. And we don't do that as adults, do we? But I think on some levels it gives us, okay, well, we're doing something educational. It's not just fun. But you're right. You had cultural experiences. You had everything from sustainability to agriculture to economy to all of these different things. But life really isn't broken up by subjects, is it?
Indeed. Or if anything, those subjects tend to overlap. For example, the cooking, you've got agriculture and history and ecology and all of those things sort of. You're kind of hitting them all at the same time. You can talk about in Vietnam we went straight from the Vietnam War to photosynthesis to agriculture to those sort of things all kind of happen at once.
Yes, indeed. And Sabrina, do you have some stories to share with us of world schooling experiences where you realized, yeah, this is just working?
Yeah, well, I feel like for us, we were thinking going into some of our travels with our daughter being so young, which is actually kind of hard to fathom that some of what she's experiencing right now, most of what she's experienced in her life so far, will wind up sort of maybe turning into the fuzzy memories of before we have out the very clear memories in our mind. And we've had millions of experiences since she was born till she's now 4 years old. And to me, that seems a little bit wild that a lot of those memories might just become the blur of our very early years. But at the same time, we realize absolutely how much that's forming a foundation for how she approaches the rest of her life and interacts with the rest of her life. And we wanted her to, I suppose, always understand in a way about diversity, that there's not one way to live, that there's not one way to find your own happiness. And we wanted her to be able to challenge the way things were around her. And, since we're based in the US at sometimes and we're traveling at other times, it really at times really allows that question to happen with what we're seeing right in front of us. So, well, why do we do this in this country, but we do this in the US or, back home? And I think that, opens up the question of, well, how do you want to live your life? And where, what do you want to make your home life like wherever you wind up calling home? And always being able to question the things around you and saying, is this what there's not just one way to do things. And not just one way to live. So I feel like that diversity has come up a lot in our travels, whether that honestly is around the US or around the world, because even within a country, there's so much diversity. But, something that is very compelling about traveling with a young child, especially, I can often get asked, I might want to travel once my kids can remember it. And since my daughter's so young, we've wrestled with this question. And, I feel like for us, the idea is that we are really trying to think about instilling in her the feelings that will last, and the feelings that you are creating adventures for yourself when you travel, that you have this understanding that the world is different, the physical world is different wherever you are, that cultures are different wherever you are, and the feeling that you can be interested in something and then experience that is that's exciting for us as we take part in our travels, even at this early age. And Jason, you said something about confidence, and that's something that I have seen so much already. And I sort of, in our own life, define world schooling as, we were talking about world schooling can happen as you're traveling or as you're learning from the world in your own backyard. And a lot of our time is spent in the outdoors and with our outdoor community. And we have lots of other families who are part of that. And I see confidence building in just daily activities where she's challenging herself, whether it's doing something new around the world where she's talking with someone who speaks a different language and saying, on a playground and saying, okay, I want to play with this person, or I can tell this person wants to play with me. But, that in and of itself, you can leave with, I've seen her leave with the broadest smile on her face that she's just interacted with someone she has no idea how to communicate with. So there's that adventure. And then there's an adventure like realizing with a group of friends that you want to scale, this fallen tree in your backyard, and together the communication and the collaboration to be able to do that. And so I think it happens on all different kinds of levels. Some of these takeaways from world schooling, not just from the cultural aspects, but from the natural world as well.
And is it fair to say that you and your family, Sabrina, are an outdoorsy type of family, and you really enjoy nature, and that really is a core part of your, I hate to use the word, but curriculum?
It's definitely a huge part of our rhythm. It was not always a huge part of our rhythm, but we realized that in nature, especially since right now we're based right outside of New York City, so it's a very busy area. And to be in nature is a very calm place. And it's a place where we can sort of have moments to just be still and reconnect and process everything else that we're taking in. And one thing I've been hearing a lot about lately that's become really important to us is sort of just taking at least 15 minutes every day, no matter what the weather, really, to just be outdoors, because it changes it changes everything for us. If something is frustrating, we step outside and it's melting away from us. It's really, it's a huge part of our daily rhythm, just every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And Jason, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to add a little to what Sabrina was saying, and this goes back to starting earlier, or I should say, one of the benefits I feel, at least from our context, but I think for many others, one of the benefits of starting earlier is many of the things she was talking about, and the way I would put it is and what I mean with starting early is that perhaps your 4-year-old won't have specific, clear memories of this, but I think there are psychological elements and behavioral elements at play at that age, and this is not just coming as a unfounded opinion out of my head. Out of many of the families that we've met that travel with young people, from diapers age to pre-kindergarten age. Many of them have said something similar to me, is that it doesn't matter whether they have specific memories of this. It's going to build this level of comfort and familiarity with difference, and comfort and familiarity with challenges. And the sooner that a child is comfortable with something new, or someone new, or some obstacle or challenge they have to overcome, whether it be climbing over a tree or a language barrier or looking at a map, the sooner that they realize that these are part of life, I think the sooner they're able to handle them swiftly and deftly.
Yes, and I think what you're swinging back around to is what we all agree the point of education is. And the point of education is to prepare our children for life. And some people define that as reading, writing, arithmetic. I always hated RRR because, well, arithmetic starts with an A. But you know what I mean? So, and other people are more into, being resourceful and practical, decision making, and finding your passion and happiness. And that's where I align in terms of the meaning of education. So perfect. I can't believe how quickly this hour has passed already. An hour has passed. We're going to take a short break. We're going to watch a 6-minute video, and then we'll be back. So we'll see you in about 6 minutes.
Okay.
Bam, 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 bam. Miro and I met a Quechuan father named Edson and his daughter in Cusco one sunny afternoon. We learned that Edson comes from an artisan family of weavers who lives in the small community of Chinchero. Edson, with his wife and daughter, run a small booth in the artisan market in central Cusco selling his family's work. I asked Edson if he and his family would be willing to host us for an afternoon of cultural exchange and learning. 4 days later, we were invited to visit his family's farm.
Visiting the quaint little town of Chinchero, and we're here to check out the weaving. This is traditionally a town where, as a community, they produce beautiful weavings. So let's go take a look.
Chinchero is a community of about 20,000 Quechua speakers located in the sacred valley of the Peruvian Andes. Chinchero is known throughout the valley for its tradition of weaving, as a large portion of the cloths, belts, hats, and other handmade woven products found in the markets around Cusco are from the Chinchero community. Residents of Chinchero are known for their strong sense of cultural identity expressed through their traditional dress and unique weaving patterns. First, we sat with the family, and Edson offered us all cocoa leaves as we honored Pachamama, or Mother Earth.
Hola, Pepe. Pachamama. You're a brony puppy. Yeah? Eat more.
Their farm was tucked among rows of farms with its perfectly tilled field growing a generous crop of potatoes. The family presented a basket of freshly cooked potatoes to us to sample the farm's yield. We noticed the animals surrounding the farm, pigs, donkeys, and cows, but no animal was more important to this family as were the sheep bearing wool. Edson's mom smiles as she showed us how to spin the raw wool into thread. We watch Edson's mother's hands, and they seem to contain the memories of generations in her fingers. At least once a week, the family dyes the spun wool using the tints from the plants surrounding the farm. Everything they need is right there. With fresh eyes, we looked at their creations. We marveled over the intricacies woven into their designs and appreciated the materials with an entirely new perspective.
Este es ojos del puma.
Ajá.
Ojos del puma. Esto es una herramienta para trabajar en la chacra. Herramienta de trabajo para la chacra, para agricultura.
So this is for the farm.
Cote.
Agriculture. Okay, and these are the eyes of the puma.
Ojos del puma.
Okay.
Todo esto se llama loraipo, una planta grande. Estos son los apos, los cerros.
Sí.
Oh, these are the mountains. I see.
Los cerros.
The mountains here.
Etzel and the women of his family shared with us their ancient art with patience and kindness. before you knew it, it was our turn. I required a bit more instruction, but Miro, of course, was a natural. We had the most amazing day, learned so much about family, working together, co-creating, and sustainability.
Me gusta.
And we're back, and I hope that you enjoyed that video. That video is actually a video that Miro and I made about an experience that we had together in Peru, and it really became a learning for us as we've traveled. Really immersing ourselves into the culture has been the biggest gift, and I believe each family has, you know, what lights them up and what really excites them as a family, and each person obviously is an individual in the family. But for us, we've been able to really identify what makes us sing as we travel, and part of that is experiencing new cultures and really seeing the world from the perspective of the people in our host country. And a lot of times we notice that they see the world very differently than we do. And for those of you that just watched that video, you know, in the beginning you saw that we all shared a cocoa leaf, and that was how we opened up the ceremony, and we learned how to weave, and we learned what sustainability looked like for this particular family. And this family wasn't concerned with iPods or with, you know, some of the things that we may be concerned with growing up, you know, in the United States or in Western cultures. But I think being able to see the world from somebody else's perspective is the biggest gift that we get from traveling. One of the things that Miro and I dig deeply into, and we have multiple conversations about, is worldviews. And I've written articles about it, and I talk about it. And the retreats that we host with teens, we talk a lot about worldviews. I think that, to me, is one of the biggest gifts, having the exposure to worldviews. And before the break, Sabrina was talking about the question of traveling with a child so young, and will she be able to remember these experiences? And I think, even though she may not be able to remember the details, she's infused with different worldviews, and the exposure, those are the things that I think creates a compassionate world, creates peace. That, to me, is the biggest gift in all of this. And so I was wondering, Jason, if you'd like to come back and share some of the observations that you've made about your family, and some of the gifts that unexpected gifts that you may have received as a family just through this whole WorldSchooling experience.
Okay. I guess I'll start from the cultural context. One of the benefits for us, and I think that this relates to, you know, basically any country in the world, but where we lived in Tokyo. Tokyo is a, you know, as I mentioned earlier, my children were raised in Tokyo for the first 10, 11 years of my son's life, and 7 years of my daughter's life. Fantastic city. I love the place, and I could move back there, you know, under the right circumstances for sure. And it's a very cosmopolitan place. But at the same time, it can feel a little culturally homogenous. A very fascinating and interesting culture, Japanese culture is. However, it is not as diverse as a place like New York City, where Sabrina lives near, or Cusco, Peru, where you used to live, where you have Aboriginal groups and other sort of cultures intermingling. One of the sort of, part of the impetus for us to leave is for our kids, as I mentioned earlier, was to become more comfortable and familiar with difference. That was an issue we had, and I could expand on that if needed. But basically, we lived in a sort of a working class neighborhood of Eastern Tokyo, and all of my children's friends, teachers, neighbors, everyone was Japanese, and everyone spoke Japanese, and very few spoke any English, and very few had interest outside of, not just, this isn't just a sort of a nationalist thing, this isn't just Japan or even Tokyo, this was the neighborhood mentality. We all know people like this who, almost every topic and subject they talk about really relates to something within a 5-mile radius of where they are. And we wanted our kids to realize there was a bigger world out there. And so now, to get to your question, moving out into the world, we started in Taiwan, then we moved to Penang, and then to Chiang Mai. And in each of those places, we tried to spend a certain amount of time visiting the local shrines or mosques or temples or churches. And we tried to have some sort of interactions with locals. My son does that mainly through sport, and my daughter does that mainly through the arts. So, for example, in Chiang Mai in Thailand, my daughter joined a local kids drama club, and she took art lessons from a local Thai woman in the old quarter, while my son joined 2 soccer teams, one which was sort of the expat community, and then another was a local Thai team. We were taking Thai lessons at the time, but I mean, when you don't know a language, we're learning how to say how much and order food. None of the kids spoke English. None of the coaches spoke English, but through sport, he made friends. And, when he showed up, hey, Jamie, that kind of thing. We've done that in, we've done it in basically every place we've gone. Here in Malaysia, I think, is sort of the antithesis of a homogenous society. We have the local Malay who are Muslim. We have a rather large ethnic Chinese population who some are Buddhist, some are other animist kind of religions. Then you have a large Indian and Sri Lankan population who are Hindu or Jain, and a variety. And then of course you have the Jehovah's Witnesses and Assembly of God and Catholic, and you have this vast mix of, and that's just religion, much less the sort of cultures that surround them. So we really have been impressed, and one of the reasons that we chose to stay in Penang as long as we did is that this place, this sort of diversity just seems to be a way of life. I know I'm on the outside looking in, but when you go to New York is is diverse and is tolerant, but sometimes that tolerance feels like I'll stand you because I'll deal with you because I have to. Whereas here, there'll be a table of Muslim people eating, this specific dish, and with a Chinese group sitting next to them, gorging on pork ribs next to a Catholic table, and it just seems to be this sort of fact of life. And that's been a great aspect for us. My son is on several soccer teams here, including a local Malay team where some people speak English, but the main language is Bahasa, the language of Malaysia and Indonesia. And so my son gets this through sport. My daughter takes guitar lessons here. And so that's sort of, and with local Malay teachers. And so I guess I think this is answering your question as far as cultural experiences. And then, sometimes they invite us to an event here or invite us to their favorite restaurant there, they being the teacher or neighbor or something like that. And we try to follow up on that when we can.
That's wonderful. Now, your family is multicultural. So you've got diversity within your family unit already. So that might be a conversation or no?
Sure. That's actually a big topic of conversation around here. My wife is Japanese. We met in Atlanta, my hometown, 100 years ago, and we had dated there before I left the States and moved to Taiwan, and missed her so much I begged her to come and join me in Taiwan, and we lived there for about 3 years before we moved to Japan and got married and had kids. So we have that sort of identity going, and we want to maintain the cultural identity of Japan in our children, and we also want to instill a little bit of an American identity for sure, but then there are the sort of third culture kid elements that we want, the global citizen, or however you want to put that, and I think that's been another important element for us, and since you brought it up, I'll touch on this, is that I talked about Japan being fairly homogenous. Our children had a few challenges at school because they were they look like me, freckle-faced white kids, but they were in a public school with all Japanese kids. Now, there was no bullying, there was no hard time. If anything, I think they were maybe treated a little better than they should, and or I should say they were maybe given a little more encouragement than the average kid, but they were treated a little like outsiders, welcome guests, but there was an element of that of difference, of kind of outside the circle, and I think that was tough for my kids because essentially they were as Japanese as the other kids. They, we ate the same food, they watched the same, anime programs, they played the same games, they played on the same teams, but it stung a little bit that that they were looked at differently, and I think that was tough. But then once we started to kind of move around, both children, but especially my son, who's a little older, came to realize, that people are different everywhere. Before they thought that that this was just the way things were in Monzen Nakacho, which was our neighborhood inside Tokyo, inside Japan. But like this neighborhood, that was just they stood out, and they realized, and before they kind of recoiled from that. Just like many kids, they want to be accepted and they want to be like other kids. And it took kind of separating ourselves from that to see that it's okay to be different. It's okay to be your own thing, your own person, and your own sort of blend of cultures. And so keeping that cultural identity alive to a certain level while also allowing them to sort of incorporate what they want has been a big part of our journey in the last year and a half, for sure. And I could continue talking at length, but I think that answered your question. Yeah, no, it was a wonderful response. Thank you. And that actually is something that Miro and I talk about a lot. We talk about global citizenship. We talk about third culture. Third culture kid is the term, and we do experience feeling like outsiders. We've been out of the country. This July coming up will mark the beginning of our 7th year out of the country, which is crazy. But we've been in Latin America the whole time, and we certainly don't look Latin American. So we will always be outsiders no matter what. And we're not part of this culture, but we certainly don't identify with being part of the culture we came from either. So yeah, it's
it's definitely a byproduct of our lifestyle, and maybe we're creating wonderful opportunities and solutions in one area, but it does come with its set of challenges. And before we get into more challenges, because I do want to talk about challenges, because I think it's important to share. Sabrina, is there anything that you'd like to add about cultural experiences and cultural learning that has just lit up your daughter? And maybe, I don't know if at 4 or at 2 she really understands worldviews, but is that something that has been part of your experience?
Well, I find that, even in our daily life, we're talking a lot about how, again, diversity with, a lot of what we were talking about, this idea of having that be planting a seed, not just talking about diversity, but living diversity, planting a seed that will hopefully ultimately grow to a very compassionate and empathetic, having her grow to become very compassionate and empathetic. Because if we are always understanding that there's not just one way to live life, then we are going to take that in mind when we interact with people. And so, I find that even when we're not traveling, if we're talking about something, she'll say, oh, well, maybe people in some cultures do that. So, she was talking with a friend, and they're having a 4-year-old conversation. So, it's very cute to listen in on. And I hear her say, no, some people in some cultures eat insects. They really do. And, she's trying to explain this, and a child's saying, really? And she's saying, yes, really. And, it's really fascinating to hear her try and even process, or, just identifying that people do things differently. And, I'm very curious to see how that continues to expand as she grows herself and as our adventures continue.
Yeah. And are there instances where you edit out some of the information because it may not be age appropriate? Or, for example, if I don't know every place that you've traveled to, but there are places that there are fields of war and famine and inequalities and things that are very difficult to talk about. Are those things that you edit out of her experience, or do you actually address them at her age?
Well, so for instance, when she was 2.5 and we were in Europe, we were right outside of where we were staying. We were very nearby Nazi concentration camps, and there was absolutely the opportunity to go there, and it would have tied in with my own her own ancestry as well, and we chose not to not to go there at that time. So there are definitely things that we pick and choose from that we say, well, we may, we will dive into that at another time. But she's also sort of led the way with her own interest to challenge us to say, we don't need to edit out as much, So, for instance, she was fascinated by Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii. This was something that fascinated her. And I was very cautious about introducing the concept of, when you talk about that story, you're talking about tragedy, about death, about slavery even. That's a part of the story related to that. And, each of those things come up in the story, and she's understanding those concepts at the ability that she can, but we're also explaining them in age appropriate ways. We're not going into graphic detail, but she's also expressing interests about, for instance, this historical period in time. She asks when we say, oh, we're going away this weekend, she said, are we going to Pompeii yet? when are we going to see the ruins? So, and she's very interested. So in a way, there are things that I will say, okay, this is too graphic. We will touch on elements of it, understand the concept of there are things that just happen in the world that are sad, or, things like that, which she now understands, but just based off of her own interests, it sort of pushes us to explain more. And so then it just becomes a matter of how we expose her to that information in age-appropriate ways.
Yeah, of course. And I think you and I are similar in the sense that we are unschoolers, and we allow the interests to guide the journey. And I think WorldSchooling really supports that in such a way that you discover new things, and as an unschooler, you don't have to stick to a curriculum. You can go down this path. And really explore and see what you get out of it. And to me, that does all the things that we talked about, which was the point of education: the resourcefulness, the passion, all of those things. People may object to this, but I don't really care that my son doesn't have an interest in algebra, and I wouldn't force it upon him. It's, I don't care. He doesn't have an interest in it. But he does have an interest in literature and, all these other things that light him up, that fascinate him. And the world just keeps dishing out more stuff to keep us interested. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Sabrina. And Jason, did you have any stories of coming across uncomfortable histories that made it a challenge to talk about? Maybe in Cambodia
all the time. And first I should, I'll say that I agree with Sabrina. I think that a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old doesn't really need to see Nuremberg or any sort of concentration camps, at least at that point in their life. They don't even need to know that stuff exists by my standards, or by my opinion. I was actually in a conversation with some other family travelers recently here in Southeast Asia, and they were asking whether they had a preteen or 2 preteens, and they wondered if others had brought their preteens to killing fields in Cambodia or to the Tol Slung Museum. And some had, and some had not. I'm not here to judge whether you do that or not. It really depends on that child and their level of maturity, and they're able to handle that. I personally could barely handle it as an adult, and I think that I think you can filter a certain amount. I don't think you need to hide those things. Our approach with tough questions like that usually is, if they ask, we answer. We may soften when the details are rather graphic or brutal, but we don't shy away from those things necessarily. I love my country and I love my adopted country of Japan, but they both have checkered pasts, and they both affect. And they both affect. They've both had an effect on many of the places we visited. We spent a great deal of time in Vietnam. I'm not a Vietnam War buff. I'm not, and I don't really have a position worth elaborating on with the war, but I answered questions when they came up, and I talked about how the people in the South feel about that war, and how the people in the North of Vietnam feel about that war. We visited a little bit of those places, but we didn't go into certain places because my children don't need to see graphic images of what soldiers on both sides did to each other. I don't think they need to see that. On another token, like I mentioned before, I spent a few years in Taiwan, and then my wife and I returned there at the beginning of our travels and spent 2 months back in the same town where we live. We wanted to show them this place that we love so much. There's a long and checkered history with Japanese occupation in Taiwan, and arguably some good things came out of it and some horrible things came out of it. And so when it was appropriate, we brought those things up, and we specifically brought those things up because these things do not appear in Japanese curriculum. If there's a book of Japanese history, there may be one page on World War II. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but those things are those kind of resources from a public education standpoint are hard to come by. And in fact, my wife tended to learn quite a bit after she left Japan to find out, and you could say the same thing about America. So to answer your question more succinctly, is we try our best to answer hard questions when they're asked, and we do tend to to add these things because we do feel like they need to know. They need to know their history, and they need to know things that have happened. But they also can. It can also be put in a way of love and objectivity for the places and the identity. We want them to love their Japanese heritage. We want them to know that I am from the United States and I love my country. However, when those things come up, we want them to know of various aspects, as well as the histories of other places. There are some horrible things that have happened in many countries that have nothing to do with Japan and America. And if appropriate, we discuss them if they want to discuss it. So yeah.
Yeah, no, and both of you again started your journey as much sooner than, or earlier than I started my journey with Miro. But I think the biggest gift that I discovered through traveling and learning about the history of all the different people and cultures and wars and American involvement and all, Spanish involved, I'm in Latin America, so that's what's most dominant here. But sure. I've learned that I no longer say it's the Spanish or the Americans. I've learned to say that it's part of our human history, and no longer dividing it. I would have never said that before, of course, but being on the road and really identifying with being a human more than anything, that's what I've discovered through the process. And it may not work for every person or every family, but it's conversations that we've been having over and over and over and over as we discover new history and stories, and it's it becomes part of our human history, and we can own it and we can heal it. So yeah. And Jason, did you have something to add to that?
Just when you were, as you were speaking, something you said triggered something I felt is very important, especially for children as young as Sabrina, but as young as my 8-year-old daughter as well. I think when you discuss these difficult moments in history, no matter where they come from, I think it's very important to do your best to make sure that the kid understands it from a historical context. I think if you relay this information, I'm trying to think of a good example from our life. Well, one, when we were in Vietnam, we explained a little about the Vietnam War before we went, but we didn't want to do too much because when we first mentioned about the war, my daughter was worried about us being shot. There was no, you have to make sure that they understand that horrible things happen, but they happened. They're not happening now. Things are different, or to the extent they're different. We watched a movie recently about, it wasn't Selma, but it was about America and school integration in the 60s. And I had to make sure later that my children knew there are still race relations problems in the States, but blacks and whites still go to school together. They haven't seen that. They didn't know if there were going to be fights in the street between people. I said, no, I think it's important, especially as young as Sabrina's children are, that you make sure that if these things are explained, that they know how far in the past that happened and how that relates to the present.
Yeah, and I think, as Sabrina said, age appropriateness is really, I mean, that's what you tap into as a parent. You know what your children can handle and what's appropriate for their development. Sabrina, did you have anything to add to that, or are you okay switching gears a little bit?
I'm okay switching gears if you want to. That's up to you.
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask the panel to share some of the challenges involved in committing to this type of lifestyle. Sabrina.
Okay, so I think probably one of the challenges we started to talk about a little bit just between the three of us over the break is in terms of finding a community when you're living a lifestyle that feels different from the mainstream, and unless you're living in an intentional community where you're already surrounded by other folks who are living differently than the mainstream, there's a lot that comes up in your life that you are processing, especially as a child. You're learning the way in which the world works, the way in which your family works within the world, the way in which you are being raised, and then ultimately as you grow up, the way in which you choose to want to continue living or change or evolve to become yourself. So I think there are definitely challenges just in terms of mainstream culture coming in and processing that with the differences in your own lifestyle. But specifically in terms of community, when we're trying to build a community, especially when we're in our home base, that was something that was done very intentionally so that my daughter had a very vibrant, good connections, the ability to make friends. And that's one of the great things about seeking out an intentional community. It's not just based off of where you live. It's based off of commonalities or, people that you're a kindred spirit to in some ways, no matter where you're calling home. And I'm very pleased to have found and created a very vibrant community for my daughter and for myself, which is very supportive and resourceful for the lifestyle that we're living. And that's almost essential for us. But it was definitely challenging to to find that. And it took a lot of, I call them sort of blind dates with parents. We were, out there meeting each other saying, are we a right fit? Are we going to, really connect here? And it took some of that to figure that out. I think another aspect that is another challenge rather is the logistics, which can feel, if someone's watching this and saying, well, I wonder if I might want to incorporate part of this into my own life, the first question becomes, well, how do I begin? How do I start? How do I afford that? How do I, make everything work? If the want is part of it, but then also the how is a really, it's highly personal because we all have different things that would make our own logistics work. But at the same time, there is certainly inspiration to be found in other people who are saying, I figured out ways. I got creative. I was able to make it work. And so I think being able to share some of those logistics, not just with how we build a community, but how we afford it or make it work, are really valuable things to be sharing as well.
Yeah, good points. And I want to talk more about community, but first, before we dive into that subject a little deeper, because community is so important to our travels, to our journey, and I think it's so important to every family that takes on this lifestyle. So let's dive into it. But first, Jason, I want to move back over to you. and ask you about some of the challenges this lifestyle has presented to you.
Okay. We've had several, like many traveling families, homeschooling families. There are a myriad of challenges that you have to overcome. A community is, finding a community and maintaining a community is part of that. Sounds like we'll be talking about that later. Friends, finding friends for your children is another part of that, which it may be some sort of spin-off of community, but I can be many things for my children, but I cannot be a soccer team, and I cannot be a group of giggling, gossiping girls. So one of my major priorities with any place that we kind of pitch a tent for a while is to where can I plug my kids in, and this tends to be more challenging as my children get older. When they're 2 years old, 4 years old, you can just throw a bunch of kids together and they'll be instant friends and they'll play around. But once the tween and teen years go, they tend to not do that as smoothly as in the past, and that's one challenge. But to give you a couple specific challenges that maybe some of your listeners have, or maybe some of them don't. And one of the things that has really hindered us from wholeheartedly diving into the unschool experience is I have to work. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, I work remotely for a Japanese company, the same job that I had in Tokyo. And sometimes there's a lot of work. Sometimes there is no work, but I'm on call essentially from 8 a.m., 9 a.m. to late, and I need to be able to reply, and I need to be able to send out. I need to finish the work that's given to me and mail it back to Japan or to a handful of other clients that I have in other parts of the world. I do copywriting, editing, freelance writing, those kinds of things. And to keep our ship afloat, I have to work. And that takes up a lot of my time lately, especially. And I think in order to be the best kind of unschool father supporter that I can be, I need to be available to my children, and I'm not a lot of the time. My wife is fantastic and does a great job with them, but she is Japanese, as I said, and so I need to be teaching my kids how to read and write. I need to be working with my kids on specific subjects. I need to be reading English books to them. And so a particular challenge, and one of the reasons that I think we've bumped into specific obstacles is that it's hard to tell a 10-year-old who's been in elementary school, conventional school system all this time, all right, go do these things, and I'll see you at dinner time. And it's also a particular emotional challenge, and I can get choked up when I talk about this, but it's an emotional challenge when you work 9 to 5 and you leave and you're gone, or even if you work late. It's one thing when you're separated, but it's another when you're in the same house and you're saying, leave me alone, I have to work, and close the door on kids that want to hang out with you. It's heartbreaking sometimes. So that's been a significant challenge to us. Language issues, as I mentioned before, are another part, specifically because we want to raise their English levels while maintaining their Japanese. And my understanding about unschooling is, or the unschooling end of the spectrum is to allow them to completely follow their interests. Well, our kids aren't interested in writing Japanese kanji for an hour a day. They don't do it an hour a day, but they're not interested in doing it at all. It's rote and it's boring, but that's the way you get it. And so we tend to enforce certain subjects that we feel will be important to their future. And of course, this relates back to the cultural identity element as well. We want them to maintain that. We'll be back in Japan in 2 weeks. We'll be back for a visit, and our daughter has lost a lot of her Japanese. She can't keep up with conversations on Skype with her grandparents, and so that's an obvious concern. So the main issues, and I think just like many aspiring unschooling parents have, is letting go to a certain amount and letting them do all that they want. But the specific challenges we have, and one of the reasons that I pointed out that I wish we had started earlier, like Sabrina, is that your kids are more used to self-reliance and resourcefulness, whereas our children, because they were in a regular school, they're, what do I do next? Now what do I do? They still want us to deliver the education to them, and if we allow them to do what they want, then there's just lots of video games being played and YouTube videos being watched. So we haven't, in short, we have a series of challenges, being the inability to be present all the time, the lack of desire to maintain languages and to keep those two things ahead. I guess that's the two main, and of course the idea that we started late and it started later than I would have cared to, and had kids who were used to having a system deliver the next assignment to them. And so it's been how should I put it? It's been 3 steps forward, 1 step back. We're definitely moving forward, but every so often we hit an obstacle and find a way to work around it. We're doing quite well now. They're actually quite self-sufficient, but I wish I was around more.
Yeah. And your story is so familiar. It's familiar to me because you've outlined the process of what we moved away from for the first 10 years of Miro's life. He said to me almost as often as "I love you, Mom," he said, "You're always working. You never spend any time with me." And that broke my heart. Up, down, middle. I mean, it just,
yeah, we still have that, and the idea of being present instead of, now we spend much more time together than we did when my wife and I were salarymen, essentially in Japan. We eat 3 meals a day together. We exercise together. We read a book together at night. But then I lock myself in this office for hours at a time, and even as we talk here, I'm checking to see if I'm on call. So I'm checking to see if I get a mail from my office, because I have to respond. And just as I'm doing that to you, I do that to my children, and I don't like doing that. But it's at this point in our life, it's the way we're able to live like this. So those are the things that I'm working on specifically.
Well, they are a set of real challenges, and I'm honored that you were candid enough and felt comfortable enough to share it, because it's not easy to admit that we have shortcomings as parents, and it's not easy to say we're not doing everything that we want to be doing to our own potential. But I understand, and I have so much compassion for this process that you're going through right now. One of the things I did want to say to you about the unschooling, schooling, and deschooling process, they do say that it takes, what is it? I can't remember anymore. I think it was a month. Was it a month for every year your kid was in school? You need that much time to let them just sort of find their freedom and do nothing. And so if you're replacing one with an older system, you haven't embraced unschooling, and that's okay. It doesn't work for your family, and every family is different. But if that was something that you wanted to do, you have to be okay with the video games and the laziness and all of that, because that's part of the process of finding your interest,
Sure,
and finding your child finding their own voice.
Yeah, I think part of it is just we've hesitated to let go completely, but we've been slowly moving that direction, and I can't say with certainty where we're going to end up, but we went from a very structured system to there's not time to elaborate, but our system is getting looser and looser, and they're finding their independence as we go. And I think once we move to our next destinations, we're going to be seeking out the community that you have. We're basically up in this 11th floor apartment with no other children around. There's not much to do. There's not much for them to wander around on their own. So when they have free time, they're basically stuck in the apartment on the couch. And we'd like to be in a place where there's more for them to see. And I think that's coming in the coming months.
Well, let's talk about community, because that's where I wanted to go next. That's where I want to end this program with. Community is so important. It's important in not only just from a world schooling perspective, but from a human perspective, to really find your community and to find a place where you belong. And that has been guiding our path. And what can you share with us some of the things that you've been doing to find and create community, and what that looks like for you and your family?
Me? Oh, okay. Well, in each of the countries that we've slow traveled through, as I mentioned earlier, we immediately seek out soccer teams for my son, and we seek out arts, drawing, drama, music lessons for our daughter. That's their interests. That way, they find kids who like what they like, and that we can find their friends. Now, as far as homeschooling or home education, unschooling, world schooling kind of community, so far that's basically been an online element. The types of Facebook groups that you can find, when Facebook started this sort of group platform, it increased their value to me 100-fold. What was once just a place to, share a family photo or some silly opinion or joke, became this really robust forum for the things I believed in, and homeschooling groups, and in particular a family travel group that you're familiar with, Lainey, called Families on the Move, have been even invaluable to our last year and a half. This particular group, and there were other groups, one run by Christine Gilbert, who runs the blog Almost Fearless. She has a group similar to this. But this particular group, Families on the Move, our groups is populated by families who are traveling full-time or gap year, or basically that travel extended periods of time with their children. And this has provided a place to meet other traveling families, to discuss the issues that are very specific to our life situation. And I would say at least a quarter of those conversations are about homeschooling or about education on the road and how you handle that. I mean, the rest is about visas and meetups and those things. But being able to meet up with other families in similar situations has been invaluable to us, and is one of the reasons that we decided to sort of put a stake down in Penang, Malaysia, where we are now, for a considerable amount of time, because lots of traveling families, backpacking families going through Southeast Asia, tend to stop here. And this gives us a chance to kind of meet up with other people, exchange ideas and information, kind of see where they're coming from. But yes, so we try to plug our kids into classes and teams that align with their interests, and then seek out groups of similarly minded people to connect with.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. Facebook has been an incredible way to create online community and then to actually turn it into real life meetups. And yeah, and you forgot to mention that I'm an admin of a group called WorldSchoolers. So there's another
sorry.
group.
Yes, of course.
No worries. Sabrina, let's go ahead and finish off this conversation. I can't believe how quickly this time just flew. But I do want to talk to you, Sabrina, about communities. Can you share some of the ways that you've managed to create community, not only there in New Jersey on the East Coast, but also as you're traveling?
Yeah, sure. So like both of you, Facebook has been really huge with connecting us with like-minded folks in terms of having a similar approach to life and learning. And often if I know we're going to travel to a certain place, I will type in on Facebook and I will search out groups that are already happening in specific locations. So I'll look up unschooling groups in different cities that we might be passing through or, spending some time in, and I will find what sort of activities or events they have happening while we're there, so that way, or just engaging in an early conversation about different opportunities to meet with people, so that way while we're traveling we're connected. And I think the one side of thing is, or the one side of the equation is creating a community, and the other side is being able to connect with people who bring new ideas to the table, and making sure that we're not creating such a one-dimensional conversation in our own lives. And and I guess I am anticipating that as something that might come up, as I'm constantly seeking out and have been able to create a community like that. But what about that diversity? And the great thing is that within our community, we are on one hand constantly talking about different things, challenging things. When you have a really robust community, you can be able to do that in a safe way. But also, part of the diversity is when you can share with your community the diversity of the experiences that you have. So it's having, community for me is not necessarily about having a diversity of a lifestyle within community. With our community, I'm looking for people who are going to lift up what we are doing, and be able to support and respect us and provide resources, and for my daughter to feel like she can find genuine friendships through that. And so as much as it is about finding other people to connect with, it's also about preserving those relationships that she's already established. And as we travel, or as we just are traveling, how is she continuing to keep those communities alive? And so, that's something that we will start to, that we'll experience this upcoming year, because, at her age, she's just starting to create those friendships. And so, in terms of visits and being able to keep, the internet is great for keeping Skype communication open, or just different resources like that. In terms of old-fashioned pen paling and journaling between 4-year-olds is really the most adorable thing. So even at that age, those simple kinds of things that can keep that community going. But the internet is really your friend for finding a community, even within your own neighborhood, where you think, I'm already here. I don't necessarily need to go to the internet to find other people. But when you're going off the mainstream, I'm not necessarily going to find people on the same street as me who are living the same way. So the internet has been very, very helpful in that way.
I totally agree. And I think community is somewhat undervalued for adults too. So, not only do our children need to find community, we need to be supported, feel supported, and find our own community too. And Yeah, I'm not going to pitch our project here, but this panel knows about how we've dealt with our challenges in community by creating temporary communities in the places that we travel to. So my son has that kind of connection with his peers. So, you know, we all do what we need to do as parents, and I think everybody on this panel, including Daryl, who wasn't here, I think we're all doing the best we can, and we're providing the best education that we possibly can through this world schooling experience for our families and for our children. So it was such a pleasure to speak with each and every one of you, and your stories delight me, and I'm just so thrilled that I have each one of you in my life and part of
Same
my
here.
community. So thank you. Why doesn't everybody, Jason, you start, give us your URL, your contact information, and just so everybody knows too, you can go to the show notes page on the Conscious Consumer Network, and you can find all of their information there too as well. But real quick, what's your website?
Oh, okay. My website is anepiceducation.com. anepiceducation.com, and from there you can find all of my social networks, the blog, and the upcoming podcast that'll launch at the end of this month.
Perfect. And Sabrina, yours?
You can find me at familyandfootprints.com, and same thing, all the social media is available there.
Fantastic. It's been wonderful speaking with everybody tonight. And I just want to say, wherever you are in the world and whatever you do, continue doing what you do, all for the love of learning. So that's it. That's a wrap. Good night, everybody.